Today, Magnus Carlsen played a fantastic game at the European Club Cup, which is going on in Albania. And he's playing with the black pieces against an international master from Bosnia with the name Bojan Maksimovic. And it's a very instructive game. You're going to learn a lot how Magnus is trying to outplay these significantly lower rated opponents. A lot of things are happening already at move 1 because Bojan Maksimovic played the move 1 e4. That's not so strange, but what is Magnus going to play against such a lower rated opponent? Well, he goes for this move, a6. And now you may think he is violating the opening principles, not fighting for the center. That's all true. It's not such a bad move, a6. It just doesn't really contribute to Black's development. But it's not too weakening, and it's with the aim of getting your opponent out of book, get a fresh position, not giving White a chance to go for a very solid line in which it will be difficult to create winning chances as Black. So that's a very interesting moment already at move 1. And of course you would like to see what happens in the rest of the game. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to see more of these kind of Magnus trolling ideas in the opening. He knows that he can take such a risk. He is relying on his general understanding and he just wants to get through the opening. d4, e6, knight f3, d5. And we are back in some sort of French defense with a pawn on a6. It's not too great, but after the move knight bd2, we have some sort of Tarrasch defense. And Black goes c5, and in these structures it's not bad at all to have the pawn on a6 at all. D takes c5 was played. Now the bishop can just recapture in one go. Bishop d3. Both sides are aiming for quick development. Knight c6, castling kingside, knight f6, queen e2. Certain cases White is hinting at this move e5. So queen c7 is played. So in case White advances the pawn to e5, you can attack it one more time with a knight. So instead, well, White has a lot of ways to play here. You can play a move like c3, for instance. But in the game, e takes d5 was played with the idea that after knight takes, the knight comes to e4, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to e7. Bishop is doing well here, guarding some squares on the king side so that White can never really build up an attack over there. Knight g3 was played. And here, bishop d7. Not the only move, there are various ways of playing. Even castling kingside seems quite reasonable. But Magnus goes for bishop d7. c3 was played. And now, interesting moment, knight f4. Black is going after this bishop on d3. If you can get the bishop pair, that is a nice small positional accomplishment for Black. After bishop takes f4, queen takes f4. This queen looks very active. It's not that it can do much, but at least you have managed to deprive White from that dark squared bishop. Rook ad1, setting up a little trap in case Black would consider castling kingside here. The bishop on d7 is unprotected, allowing the sacrifice on h7. And on the next move, the rook takes on d7. White wins a pawn. So therefore, first, before castling, Black has to protect that bishop one more time with the rook. Rook fe1, castling kingside. And I think we have a very comfortable position for Black. And Magnus feels absolutely fine with the outcome of the opening. Queen c2. Attacking the pawn on h7, and g6 is a nice way to close this diagonal. So the bishop on d3 has absolutely no chances to sacrifice itself or to cause some damage on the king side. White goes h4, dreaming of this idea of playing h5 and take, and maybe bishop takes, and then after sacrificing it all, you can hopefully create a perpetual. So we overprotect the pawn on g6 with the move king g7. After h5, now the bishop goes back to c8. Very typical standard play in these positions in which there's only one open file, and Black is going for the exchange of rooks, because the more pieces will come off the board, the power of the bishops will become more clear. And that's exactly what's going to happen in the game. Bishop e4, rook takes rook, rook recaptures. And now White is planning to take on c6 and damage the pawn structure. So knight comes to e5, knight e2 played, attacking the queen. Knight takes f3 with check. Bishop takes back. And well, there are various moves. Queen e5 was played. The queen looks very central. After the move queen b3, white is looking for ideas to take on b7 at some point. So anyway, the queen went back to c7. I'm not sure it's really a loss of time, but definitely the queen could have gone there right away. And now the move g3 was played. It's not clear what white is going to do next. Black is rock solid. The bishop looks passive, but soon it will join play. And well, interesting moment. The move rook d8 was played, and that's the move I think a lot of people would have played here. It's just that the engine says that there's the move g5. That's an absolute bizarre idea, but I think you have ideas of pushing your f-pawn and maybe go g4 or maybe f4, looking for attacking ideas on the king side. But a normal person like Magnus, well, I'm not sure he's normal, but he goes for the move rook d8, just continuing the standard plan of aiming for this exchange of major pieces. Rook takes rook, bishop recaptures, pawn takes pawn, black recaptures with the h-pawn as well. And well, this is exactly what black had been looking for. Now after knight f4, the pawn is placed on b6 so that the bishop no longer has that defensive duty. Queen to d1. Maybe in certain cases the queen can do something on the d-file. So black just offers the exchange of queens. Queen d7. Queen e2. White keeps queens on the board, but now the queen will be centralized a little bit more. Knight comes to d3. Bishop c7. Step by step black untangles, and now knight comes to b4, intending to take the pawn on a6 because queen and knight are both attacking that pawn. Black goes a5. That's a very logical move, kicking the knight away. So the knight goes back to c2. It should be said that you can maybe play something like knight a6, trying to trap the bishop. But okay, bishop goes back to d8, and well, the knight seems to be some sort of stranded. So that's not a move you would seriously consider. Knight c2 was played in the game. Now bishop d7. The knight went back to e3. But you see, white doesn't have a constructive plan at all. And black is making some progress. First on the queen side. So now the pawns are starting to advance. They can count on the support of the bishops. Maybe at some point black would like to break with a move like b4. In the game there followed a3 to cover that pawn push. But now, very instructive moment once again. Magnus played the move a4. So his idea is to neutralize white's queenside majority. These pawns, they cannot easily be advanced. And that gives the opportunity for black to change the character of play. Because after king g2, now black is going to use its extra pawn on the king side, starting with f5. Excellent move. Queen c2 played, bishop b6, adding some more pressure against the knight, queen e2 back, and now e5 is played, threatening to push the pawn to e4, trapping the bishop. Bishop goes to a8. Random square, but you would like to stay on the diagonal. Black continues with e4. Very nice move. Knight d5 was played, intending to take on b6, so the bishop goes away. And, well, objectively, black is better. But with correct play, if white, for instance, plays a move like c4, there are reasonable chances to save the game because of the limited amount of material. There are possible pawn exchanges. And with a move like c4, you even create the possibility of getting a way for your queen in to attack the king on g7. So I think that would have been a better practical decision, but it's very difficult to sense the moment when to change that character of play. And Maksimovic decides just to stay passive, try to hold the position by not committing any pawn moves. He played knight b4, bishop c5, bishop b7, and now look, king h6 was played. Now you're thinking, what is this king going to do? Well, wait a second, we will soon see more. Bishop a8, another waiting move, but now bishop e8, guys, excellent idea. So the idea is to go g5 followed by bishop h5, and it was important to have the king on h6 to support the bishop coming to the h5 square. There followed the move c4, and here, interesting moment, as Magnus could have played g5, continuing the plan, ignoring the pawn, and I think that's a very good idea, but I would like to show you what may have happened in that case. If you take the pawn on b5, the bishop comes in to h5, attacking the queen. If queen goes away, the bishop comes in with check. King is in trouble. If king goes to g1, it's boom, queen takes g3, exploiting the pawn on f2 being pinned, and it's going to be mate on the next move. If the king goes somewhere else, let's say to f1, now the only thing you have to do is creating some more space for your queen to come over to the h-file. So king h7 followed by queen h6 is just completely lost. And you see the power of black's pieces dominating the white king. I think that after g5, maybe maybe Magnus didn't like the idea that there's this option to go g4, preventing the bishop coming to h5. Still, I think black is in good shape if he plays a move like queen f4 with nice control over the king side. And of course, if you take on f5, it's bishop h5 and the attack continues with the bishop coming in, attacking the white king. Anyway, let's get back to the game. After the move c4, queen d4 was played, putting more pressure on the king side. And still, the plan is to go g5, followed by bishop h5 and bishop f3. So here, the move bishop d5 was played to protect the pawn on c4 one more time. And now g5 anyway. Very instructive moment once again. Knight c6 was played. And you're attacking the queen. So the queen got to move queen to d3, offering the exchange of queens. But now you have a big problem as white, because you can't really keep the queens on the board. If the queen goes away, you have potential check on f3. White's king side is falling apart. So queen takes d3 played, e takes d3. And all of a sudden you have a passed pawn, which means the pawn on b5 can't be taken. The d pawn is too strong. If you try to come back in time to cover the promotion square, it's bishop h5, and the d1 square is covered. So that secures the promotion of the d pawn. Back to the game. Instead of pawn takes pawn, king f1 was played, so the king is trying to come over. But now after b takes c4, you have a big problem, because you can't take with the bishop. That hangs the knight on c6. Therefore, the knight went back to e5, but now the d pawn comes forward, threatening to promote the pawn, king e2. And now it's bishop takes f2, and of course, king can't capture the bishop because of the promotion of the d pawn. If the king captures the pawn instead, then the pawn on g3 will be taken. That's also awful. Therefore, white played the move g4 first, aiming for more pawn exchanges. That is white's only hope. But there are simply too many black pawns still on the board. And the bishops, they are now dominating the board. They are better than this bishop and knight. Bishop went to d4, attacking the knight and the pawn on b2. Knight takes c4. So knight protects the pawn, but this time it's possible to take on g4, and the knight cannot recapture from e5. King takes pawn, and now g3 is there. Double g pawn, but these pawns are really strong. King d3, attacking the bishop, and now Magnus showing his class again. He's not interested in moving the bishop away, but he played the move bishop f7 instead. And that's beautiful, because this time if you take the bishop, there's another pawn which can be promoted, and there's nothing white can do against it. If you take the bishop instead, you take on d5, and if the king recaptures, the g-pawn is out of reach. Therefore, the bishop went back to g2, and now the bishop just stays on the board. Maximum pressure on Maksimovic. Pawn on b2 is in trouble. Knight b6 was played before taking the pawn. You go bishop b3, securing that pawn on a4. Very good technique, of course. King e3, bishop takes pawn. And on the next move, the pawn on a3 is going to be taken. Bishop c6, well, wait a second. Bishop is now trying to take the pawn on a4. So if you take on a3, it's knight takes a4. And okay, objectively, black is still winning, but the king is relatively close. And if you can get in front with your king of these pawns, there are still drawing chances. However, instead of taking the pawn, much more clever is to undouble your g-pawns by sacrificing your most advanced pawn, threatening to promote it. If king goes to f2, you have bishop d4, winning the knight thanks to a nice check. So bishop takes g2 played, and now it's bishop takes a3. Now we have two outside passed pawns, and that's simply too difficult to handle for white. Bishop c5 is the main threat, tending to win the knight. King d3, where should the king go? You're like in the middle and you can't really choose a side. Bishop b2, so the a pawn is only 3 squares away from promoting. Bishop d5, bishop takes, knight takes d5, and here after a3, Maksimovic resigned because the a pawn is about to come forward. Other idea is just to bring up your king and g pawn on the other side, and that's going to be losing, of course. So very impressive performance by Magnus Carlsen, of course, against a much lower rated player. For him, very easy game. I think he was enjoying himself, didn't feel under pressure, enjoyed the bishop pair, and of course it's always nice to troll your opponent on the very first move. Thanks for watching. Click to the subscribe button, and then of course more trolling from Magnus in the future again.